Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the William G. McGowan Theater at the National Archives. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here. Whether you're here in our theater or watching us on our YouTube station, I'm pleased you could be with us for Preservation of War, Vietnam, the Combat Artist Program. Tonight's discussion is part of our programming related to the Remembering Vietnam exhibit upstairs in the Lawrence F. O'Brien Gallery. And we're very pleased that our partner for this evening's program is the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you about two programs, both about First Ladies, that are coming up this week. Tomorrow at noon, author Sheila Tate will discuss her book, Lady in Red, an intimate portrait of Nancy Reagan. Tate focuses on the various roles that Mrs. Reagan played during her years in the White House and offers a rare glimpse into the life of a president's wife. And a book signing will follow the program. And on Friday at noon, we'll show the 2009 PBS documentary film Betty Ford, The Real Deal, which profiles Betty Ford, her time in the White House, her advocacy for equal rights, and the founding of the Betty Ford Center. To learn more about these and all of our public programs and exhibits, consult our monthly calendar of events online at archives.gov. Check our website or sign up at the table outside the theater to receive email updates. And you'll also find information about other National Archives programs and activities. And another way to get more involved in the National Archives is to become a member of the National Archives Foundation. The foundation supports all of our education and outreach activities, and there are applications for membership also in the lobby. As I mentioned at the outset, this program is related to our special exhibit, Remembering Vietnam. Our curatorial staff combed through National Archives records here and across the country to find documents that tell the stories recounted in the 12 episodes of the exhibit. These records came in many forms: typed reports, photographs, audio recordings, motion picture films, and videotapes and artifacts. Imagery of the Vietnam War in photographs and moving images is familiar. Coverage of the war in print and television media was extensive and far-reaching. Less well known is the artwork created by artists in the field. In an age of cameras, paints, and pencils would seem to be out of place. Combat art, however, preserves the human experience of war in a different and unique way. The National Archives contains some of the founding documents of the Combat Artist Program. I hope you had an opportunity to see the reproductions of some of these documents as you came into the theater, like the many letters hashing out details of the program, photos of combat artists, and newspaper articles, and more. And now I'd like to ask all Vietnam veterans of any United States veterans who served on active duty in the United States Armed Forces at any time during the period of November 1st, 1955 to May 15th, 1975 to stand and be recognized. Veterans, as you exit the McGowan Theater after tonight's program, National Archives staff and volunteers will present each of you with the Vietnam Veteran lapel pin. On the back of the pin is embossed, "A grateful nation thanks and honors you." The United States of America Vietnam War Commemoration is a national initiative, and the lapel pin is the nation's lasting memento of thanks. Now I'd like to invite Lynn Ezell to the stage to introduce our panelists. Lynn was appointed director of the National Museum of the Marine Corps in July 2005 after having served 21 years at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. The National Museum of the Marine Corps, located near Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, opened in November 2006 and showcases the history of the Corps from its establishment in 1775 to today's deployments around the globe. She joined the National Air and Space Museum in 1984 as a curator and held several senior positions, including executive for development, program manager for the planning, design, and construction of the Stephen V. Udvar-Hazy Center, and assistant director for collections and management. Then also worked as a historian for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration for 10 years, from 1974 to 1984. She was a faculty member in the Historic Preservation Program at the Loudoun County campus of Northern Virginia Community College for many years, and is the author of several books, including Out of Harm's Way, Moving America's Lighthouse, and Building America's Hangar, the design and construction of the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. In 2009, she received the Dickey Chappelle Award from the Marine Corps League in recognition of her contributions to the Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lynn Uzelli. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. The National Museum of the Marine Corps feels pretty special to be invited to this program. Thank you very much. Just so I can better understand, because I couldn't see, because I was behind the curtain, show of hands of anyone who has worn a military uniform. Okay. And okay, good. It's good to know. And how many people in the room have been to the National Museum of the Marine Corps? Well, that is way more hands than I expected to see, but I see a few marketing opportunities out there, and I hope that I can inspire you to visit. The National Museum of the Marine Corps opened on the Marine Corps birthday in 2006. So in museum years, we're still very young. But to date, we've seen 5.5 million visitors come through our doors. We've positioned the museum, we've marketed ourselves as not strictly a military museum, but as an American history museum, whereby that history is seen and told through the eyes and deeds of Marines. We see a mix of visitors. In the spring and summer, we see primarily people who have no military affiliation. During the fall and the winter, we see more people who have worn the uniform. It's a good-sized building. If you've been down I-95 or up and you see that great big building and you think it's some strange church, that's us. And if General Christmas were here, he'd say it is a church in a way, and it has become the Marine Corps home. We're 238,000 square feet. We recently doubled in size. Right now, our history stops with the telling of the Vietnam War, but we have 40 more years worth of story to tell. The building is now ready for us to tell those stories, and over the next several years, we will be opening something new every year. So if I can get you down there once, I hope I can get you down there repeatedly. A giant screen theater opened last summer with the signature film, We the Marines. A children's gallery is now full of our smallest visitors. Something we underestimated by orders of magnitude were how many small children would come. And my boss, a retired two-star, said, of course, Marines are proud of what they've done, and they're going to bring their children and their grandchildren, and they do. And apropos to this evening's subject, we opened our combat art gallery last summer. So you may be thinking that military museums are all about weapons and tanks and aircraft and uniforms. Yep, we have a lot of that. It's the backbone of our collection. But all of the official Department of Defense, federally funded museums also have a very rich art collection. And we're so very happy that we now have a gallery in which we can share those collections when you all next visit. Our art collection contains some 9,000 pieces created by over 350 artists. We think that's pretty good, but the Navy holds over 20,000 by 2,000 artists. Likewise, the Army and the Air Force have very robust collections. And if you were to visit a multi-service art show, I think you'd be able, in a very short amount of time, to pick out which works were done by Marines. For the most part, they're very people-centric, and you'll hear about some of that tonight. They're up close and personal. They're often gritty and often raw. Officially, the Marine Corps' art program originated in 1842. Its mission was simple: keep America informed about what its Marines are doing in the Pacific. After World War II, several of those artists went on to be highly successful and generally well-known artists, including Tom Lovell, John Clymer, and Harry Jackson. I bet you didn't know they were Marines. During the Korean War, Marine and civilian artists went into combat to record the experiences of leathernecks there. But it was the Combat Art Initiative during Vietnam that provided the basis of the collection as it exists today. The Marine Corps deployed dozens of Marine and civilian artists to Southeast Asia. According to Joan Thomas, our art curator, who is in the audience tonight, she said, "Vietnam is our largest and most diverse collection, created by reserve, active duty, and civilian artists who produced more than 2,500 works. The majority of those works consist of drawings, watercolors, and acrylics done in-country at the studio in Da Nang or in the field." Since then, combat artists have documented Marine experiences in such places as Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, Grenada, and Haiti, just to name a few places where Marines have operated over the past 4 decades. And those are the stories that will be featured in these new galleries. Artists are given a simple order: go to war, do art. The Marine Corps doesn't tell them what medium to use. It doesn't tell them how to express themselves. It doesn't tell them what emotions they want the artwork to evoke. And I think that's the strength of our program. It relies on the artist's authentic and unvarnished focus on the human condition under the most trying of circumstances. And you will hear about one of those especially trying times tonight, Vietnam 50 years ago. I want to deliver just one advertisement before I introduce the panel facilitator. The Marine Corps and the Navy have banded together to sponsor a joint art show. It will open on 6 June, the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Bellewood in France. It's titled A World at War, the Marine Corps and U.S. Navy in World War I. And I hope you'll make plans to visit, to see these 92 pieces of really great art created by 42 artists. It is now my pleasure to introduce the facilitator of tonight's panel discussion, Charles Gro. He served as a Marine, both of the enlisted and the officer variety. He was a combat photographer and combat artist, a mentor and teacher. He is still those two things. And he continues to contribute to the collection today and inspires others to do so, and that's probably the most valuable thing right now. But most importantly to me, he is my deputy and my friend. Charlie, we look forward to this evening's discussion among seasoned combat artists such as yourself.
Good evening. I'd like to bring on the artists and get the talk going. So without further ado, Mr. Kristopher Battles, current artist, Jim Butcher, Vietnam Marine Corps artist, Ben Long, Vietnam Marine Corps artist, and Jim Pollock, Vietnam United States Army artist.
I should wear my colorful socks.
So before I get started, I'd like to ask one question. I couldn't quite see. How many hands, hey you, in the audience who served in Vietnam? Welcome home, brother. Yeah. All right. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Thanks for making time tonight. I'm looking forward to this. I guess we should start by asking you to say just a couple words about why you wanted to be a combat artist. And since there's 3 Marines in the room, we'll start with our soldier.
I'm an Army guy. My name is James Pollock, and in 1967, I served on the U.S. Army Combat Art Team 4. And I first heard about the program. Harvey Dunn, who was a World War I artist, originally came from South Dakota, and I was very familiar with his things. I went to South Dakota State University, and Harvey Dunn also went there. And they had a lot of his work there, and they had a lot of military paintings. And when I was going to college, I studied where did they come from, what was behind them. Okay. And so I knew a little bit about how artists and history went together, and when this opportunity came up, I jumped on the bandwagon. I really wanted to do it. I was in a safe spot in Korea at the time, and my colleagues over there, other soldiers, they thought I was a little light in the head wanting to go to Vietnam, but I knew this was a history project, and I weighed the risks against what the outcome would be, and I decided to go.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jim. Want to go to Ben next?
Well, let's see. I started out as an artist in the Art Students League. And when it came time that it was obvious I was going to have to go to either be drafted or join the Marines, the fellow who had a studio below me was a man named Harry Jackson, who was a Marine combat artist in World War II. And he said he knew someone in the Marines who could make sure that I could become an artist in the Marines. Of course, when you join the Marines, it doesn't necessarily turn out like that.
Right.
And so I became an infantry officer, and for 2 years and 3 months, I stayed an infantry officer. And then finally, I sort of ran out of options as an infantry officer. You had to keep renewing a 6-month sign-up just to be able to get to be a combat artist. At that time, I only had about 6 months left in the Marines. So they finally let me stay and become a combat artist. And that's how it came about after 2.5 years.
Thank you, sir. The second Jim.
Okay. I really didn't know anything about the combat art program. I was enlisted in the Marines and was offered the aviation side of things. I kind of passed the test and the mechanical stuff. I was trained at Navy Memphis as a jet engine mechanic, and I was in Vietnam. Shortly, I found out, well, that happened fast, but there I was in Vietnam. I was working on aircraft, and one of the pilots said to me, "Hey, do you know there's some guy down at headquarters trying to get artists together to join some art thing?" And I was really curious. So my time off, I went to see Colonel Henry. He was in country, trying to find art-trained people that he had a few officers. At the time, Captain Dyer was there, and he was doing artwork. And Len Dermott was a lieutenant artillery officer. But I was the first enlisted guy to come forward, and I told Colonel Henry, I said, "This is I don't have anything to show my art, because I went to art school, but I don't have anything to show you." He handed me a sketch pad. He said, "I'll get you the day off. I want you to fill that thing up." So I was sketching like mad, and I got the job. And what's really strange about the opportunity, he didn't tell me, he asked me. I said, "Is this the Marine Corps?" I'm an enlisted man. I'm told what to do and what to think. But he said, "No, we want this to be inspired. We want you to want to do this." And I wanted to do it. Once I found out what it was about, and it was an incredible experience. From that moment, he gave me a repeat press pass, Marine Corps press pass. I could go anywhere I wanted, use any conveyance I wanted to. And he said, "Stay busy or you're going to be back in the air wing." But I loved it. It was scared to death half the time, but it was really worth it.
Excellent. Chris?
Well, as a young Marine, I enlisted in '86, so I'm not a Vietnam veteran combat artist, but I was a young Marine in the '80s, and I kept seeing this wonderful artwork on all the walls of all the bases. It's Colonel Neary's work and Colonel Waterhouse's work and various prints, one of the print sets they had, and I thought, what a great thing. And I'd enlisted as a computer operator at the time, and I was like, why didn't my recruiter tell me? I didn't know, obviously, that you couldn't do it necessarily as an MOS at the time. But years go by, and I was out of the Marine Corps, and I emailed, I found this email address for this combat artist, Mike Fay, who was doing the work in Iraq. And so I emailed him, and next thing you know, he's sort of hooking me to get me to think about doing it. And the next thing you know, I'm swearing in again at 38 years old and re-enlisting, and was mobilized to active duty and sent over to Iraq within, 3 months of being in. So I'd always wanted to be an artist, of course, and having been a Marine, those are two loves of mine, so it was a perfect match, kind of a calling.
Excellent. My experience was not unlike yours and yours. I'd seen artwork. I knew of Thomason. I knew I wanted to be an artist. I'd earned a half scholarship to a school in New York, and I couldn't afford to go. So I decided to live a life worth painting. Enlisted in the Marine Corps. And the recruiter told me, I can only make you a couple promises. Sore feet and a sore back. Beyond that, you're on your own. And he recommended I take a portfolio with me to boot camp. So I did. And late in the third phase of boot camp, the drill instructors tried to talk me into doing anything but art. You've got a high GT, you ought to be in languages or Intel. I was way too smart to be that smart. Went down and interviewed for the art program, and Jack Dyer made a mistake and let me in. So that's kind of a condensed version, but I didn't get to paint for him for a couple of years, though. I was too young, and they wanted you to be an NCO, and I was still slick sleeve. So that's who's in front of you, and that's why they're artists. When I read about the art programs, one of the things that seems to be common throughout all the services, at least the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, is that they don't tell you what precisely to cover. They want an authentic, unvarnished truth from your perspective. And I think one of the strengths of the collective collections is that you've got cooks and grunts and pilots and comm officers and photographers and all kinds of different MOSs, officers and enlisted. And they weave together a real nice pattern that tells a more complete story. So what did you do? What inspired you to pick the stories that you chose to focus on, to paint, to draw?
In the Army program, we had our open travel orders, and we would go visit a unit for 2 or 3 days, and then we'd go back and we'd go visit another unit. And when I was doing this thing, I would focus on the individual soldiers and some of the tribulations that they would have.
Right.
In the Army's program, there was 46 artists altogether. Between 1966 and 1970, the Army sent teams of artists over there. And there would be typically 5 people on a team, and there was 9 teams from 1966 to 1970, total of 46 artists. And each artist would go in and, they paint and draw whatever they felt like doing. And because of the diversity of these artists that were in there, the subject matter covered is almost, I had a website up, and people would write to me, why didn't you do some dogs? They were dog people. And I didn't do a dog. I never visited a dog platoon, but one of the other artists, Augie Cuneo, did. So, I mean, that's the way it was. The subject matter was whatever you were visiting, whoever you were visiting with.
Okay. So you had complete control over what you did after you got there?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Ben, you were in charge of the combat art team. What inspired you to pick topics or to?
Well, when I finally was able to become an artist, I was sent to the 3rd Marine Division had just left, and I spent the whole time in the 3rd Marine Division. So I had to come down to the 1st Marine Division. 3rd Marines had been shipped out to Okinawa. Marines were winding down.
Okay.
1970, when I think pretty much all of us were about to be taken out of Vietnam. And because of that, I came into a small group of Marine artists who basically seemed to be doing whatever they wanted to do as well. And maybe it was a bit abrupt for them that I had to, I really felt like they should go out to the field. And so we set up this program where we tried to cover every unit left in the 1st Marine Division the best we could before they had to leave.
Right.
And so we would go out for a week. I had 4 other men, and they would pick a unit and go out to that unit for a week and do drawings and travel with them, sleep with them, eat with them, and stay for whatever period of time that they felt it was time to come back, whether it started to become a little too active. Some of them would want to come back sooner. Okay. And they did very well. They come back and work for 2 weeks to work up all the sketches they had. Some of them used photographs because easier and quicker, and particularly with moving with a platoon or a squad, you didn't spend a lot of time. I found that as well. It's a little difficult to always be able to sketch from life, right. But the main emphasis was to try to get these drawings from life the best they could possibly do. Sketches that were done that were real enough for them to experience it. And so their experiences, when they got back, they could somewhat make them up. I mean, I did too. You have to remember the scenes that you saw and try to react to them and try to keep it as fresh as possible. And I think they did a pretty good job. And that's what I think, managed to do. And Colonel Henry was he was on it all the time as well. And he was quite an artist himself. So we got all kinds of feedback. So that was very nice.
Excellent. Feedback from colonels can always be interesting. Right. Motivating for sure.
Always helps. Yes.
Jim, how do you pick what you chose?
Well, being an air wing guy, I noticed the collection and it was very small at the time because, like I say, we were just starting out over there. We had no MOS, we had no accountability to anybody. We just were accountable to Washington, Anderson Hall. That's nobody in country was watching us or telling us what to do. We didn't have to muster anymore. We didn't have to, no accountability. That was the biggest thing. We were totally free to express ourselves and how we experienced this thing. And since I was a wingy, as they were called, that I felt I should cover the activities of the aviation side of the air war, basically. And I couldn't fly in the fixed wings, but I could get on choppers and run around with them. Did a lot of medevacs, and that's really the blood and the gut stuff. They don't take on healthy people. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you about one story. The old CH-36s were built for Korea, but they were recip thing, shake and rattle. Lucky that they even flew, but took on a guy who was really mangled up, and they had a lot of bandage dressings on it, but he was bleeding badly. And he's a black guy, and they started calling him the N-word. I said, "What the hell are you doing?" I could hear him on the thing. And when we got to the NSA hospital in Da Nang, I confronted the corpsman about it. I said, "What was that about?" He said, "I'm sorry I had to hear that, but we do that to make them mad. And the adrenaline helps them stay alive, and it keeps them out of shock." And it worked apparently because I saw the guy later. He didn't lose his arm. So that was such an odd thing to. That was only that corpsman's style. He wasn't instructed to do that by any means. That's not a Marine Corps policy. But I saw a lot of that stuff, and there's a lot of in those 36. They had a weight factor big time, and I had to get off a couple of times because they take a few guys on. But I felt the air war was being neglected, and I did a lot of sketches from the ground. I saw I was in a photo recon squadron, and those guys were armed, not armed. They're unarmed aircraft. All they had was their speed. You're shaking your head. You know about that. Yeah. Were you in the same outfit?
I was the photo officer.
Oh, okay, great. All right. We understand, don't you? But I saw them working the DMZ from Cantien and Quezon. You could see them working. All they had was I saw a SAM missile come up after one of them. The afterburners screwed out the back of that Phantom, and he was gone. That's really it. But that was exciting stuff to see how they were working in the field to support for the grunts and things. Right. And But I didn't have, the weirdest thing is I had no schedule, no guidebook, no, and no mentors even. We were just I took my chevrons off because I found as an enlisted man I had trouble getting certain things, getting in places and getting on certain choppers and things. But it was, we kind of designed our own system, but like Colonel said, stay busy or you go back to the air wing. And I did most of my finished work back in the States. I did a lot of sketching from life and things, and photography. The cardinal sin in this business is to use someone else's photograph. That's dumb. It's not your experience. So we had to get out there and see it. And I felt like I was watching history taking place. Did I said enough?
Yeah, thank you. What inspired you, Chris?
Well, it's a strange thing that the Marine Corps doesn't make you paint a certain way. And I had a story where I was in Iraq, and this young lieutenant asked me, Sergeant Battles, who tasks you to do the paintings? And I was just like, sir, nobody tasks me. And you could just see the gears grinding in his head trying to get his mind around that idea. Because the poor lieutenant, he was tasked to do everything, but this sergeant was in country in Iraq going around, same way, getting flights out to platoons and different things. But there was some planning that would go on. I would talk to Joan, or now I talk to Gail, and they say, well, this is something we might need for the collection, whether it's artillery or chaplains or infantry or tanks or whatever it is. And so there's a little bit of a plan. Then you go to the deployment and you see what you can get, because some units don't want to have you out. Some units welcome you with totally open arms. And so it's just a matter of getting around in country as much as you can and seeing who will take you in. And then you just keep your eye open, and then it's sort of artsy. You take it in, and you whatever fancies you, which is a strange thing for a Marine to do.
Excellent, yeah. It is a bit of a disconnect when you show up and people ask questions from a different perspective and they just can't understand. But it was my experience, with very few exceptions, with the artists that I've been exposed to. They all practiced stay busy, stay busy. Yeah. Charlie Waterhouse went to Vietnam for a few weeks and produced like 500 sketches. He was always busy. Colonel Gish went to Somalia, and he was called back out of retirement, and he was drawing every single day. He was a billy goat. Nothing got him down. The heat, nothing. He was just always out there. You got to carry your weight and the pack, and you've got to measure up to them in some way, or you don't fit in, and you don't get to stay with them and sleep with them and eat with them and fight with them. So each of you has spoken about what inspired you, and a couple of you have mentioned cameras. So the big question, why do we need combat art, especially in a time of cameras?
Well, it's another window into a history, I think. It's different than a writer, or different than a poet. It's different than a photographer. So it's just another window into the history of a war. We carried, the Army actually issued us a camera, a little Kodak Instamatic camera. Okay. I carried my own. Okay. I carried a sketchbook. I carried a rapidograph pen, which is an ink, ink. And I didn't. Some of the artists took watercolor pads. Roger Blum, he claimed he used an old Prang watercolor, kids watercolor, out in the field with them. But I used the rapidograph pen, and I relied when it come time to do some work. My total work, when I get done with it, it still leans a little bit toward the sketch size, because I had a hard time leaving that immediacy of a sketch, and going to a finished painting. And so a lot of my work is more, it's quarter toward a sketchy type of art than a finished type art. Right. But yeah. The photographs the big problem we had with our photographs is we couldn't get them developed. We had to send them down to the Army's special services where they developed them, and we had much film, and they were getting kind of irritated with us sending the film down there. And so we really they dragged their feet and they wouldn't do it, and it was an issue getting that stuff developed until we got to Hawaii. We spent 60 days in country in Vietnam visiting units, and then we spent another 60 days in Hawaii doing the finished work. Okay. So, and that's how these teams operated. We had open travel orders. Typically, we lived we had a barracks, and we lived in a special section of where special troops are, and our barracks, the barracks we had in Long Bend had a refrigerator, which was really
That's how you
in
live
Vietnam to have a refrigerator was pretty good.
right, yeah.
So when we would go out in the field, we come back, we had a pretty plush place to come to when we came back home. So, but
Did you ever see a drink with ice in it in Vietnam? I never did either.
we had ice water.
Yeah,
But we had a couple Mormons in our group, and we used to keep a cooler of water when we had coming back. And the Mormons, they don't they can drink Kool-Aid, and so they took and poured Kool-Aid in that water of ours. And Sam Alexander, one of the guys that was on our team, said, "Well, let's fix them." And so he went and got some Everclear and put it in that. So, but
It's a lot of Kool-Aid.
I think the whole thing probably got. But those were when we come back. It was fun times like that. But when we were out in the field, we did whatever the unit we were going with was. If we were on a ambush patrol or a patrol out, that's what we did for 2 days or 3 days. We were exposed to the dangers that they were exposed to.
Right.
And so it's just the luck of the draw whether if something happened out in the field. But when I was over there in 1967, that was before Tet, and Long Bend was a very safe place. Now I've followed along with some of my friends from Team 9, which was getting up in the 1970s. That same barracks that I was talking about had I had a refrigerator. We had a refrigerator and stuff like that in. They had sandbags all around their barracks. So that's how Long Bend changed from when I was there and from when they were there. So
You've been an artist for a number of years. Why art in a time of cameras?
I think in Vietnam, the camera was obviously useful as a tool. And most of the artists that were with me, I was really trying hard to make sure that they would do as much as they could from life.
Right.
As I said before, but at the same time it's difficult to do quite a bit. And so some of these, almost every one of them had to carry a camera. It's something where I really believe that the true depth of that kind of drawing is their own kind of personal read on what is happening and how they experience it. They can use the photographs, again, as I say, as a tool because they can't possibly keep the man who's in motion, stay there long enough to get it done.
Right.
But their experience of having experienced that kind of movement, that kind of energy, was important to try to capture it. Whether they're using their photograph as the sketch that they could have made if they were that quick. Was it Goya used to say, you should draw the figure when he falls out of a 2-story window before he hits the ground. We're not that good. But
we need a 3-story building.
It might have been a 3-story.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I still think it had to do with how they reacted to the experience that they were sent out to be involved in. That kind of everything from the nasty bugs and the heat and everything else that sometimes took up more of the time of, long patrols that didn't come up with anything except for immense fatigue. And then you have to dig a deep hole and then another one before the night is, and then it's something that if they were able to translate that kind of experience, I think that's what made that combat art.
And before I went on my first trip, I was lucky to spend a few days in the collection. And I looked specifically at the works by Yako and Caselli. And a lot of the stuff that they did it touched on expressionism. You could tell that there wasn't much photographic support to help it, and it was very, very expressionistic. And that was, I thought, one of the things that helped to define the art and a photograph. But I look at some photographers like Lucian Reed. The guy is an artist with a camera. So we still have to ask, why art when we've got cameras? Jim?
I get in this debate a lot, even recently. It's not rocket science, but it's kind of let's compare it to music. You can hear music played on a computer. It's interesting. It's got the right beat, it's got the right sound, all that stuff, but it's a computer.
Yeah.
Somebody had to feed it in there, but it's still just a computer, all due respect. But you see art that's created by the human hand. That makes it valuable right away. You know that it's not rubber stamped or it's made by some computer. It's someone's impression. A photograph's a slice of time.
Right.
It's an instant. And I think art can span that, more of an impression of an idea rather than a slice of time. That makes sense?
That does. It does.
Well, some of the best combat art I've seen is some combat photography. Some of the compositions and it was just a serendipity, and they took it. And there is a sense that it is machine made. Although, like you say, Lucian Reed, he is artistically guiding that machinery. All right, but with artwork, your tools are very crude, and you are the machinery. Now, you also have a lot of software in there. So every artist has a totally different machine and a totally different mind, a totally different software, whatever you want to call that. So he or she, they are seeing it differently. Cameras are quite a bit the same. You can have different camera types, but you give 5 Marines a Pentax, it's the same exact machinery. Whereas, yeah, we may be humans, but there's artistically there's a lot of difference, and so it's a little more valuable, and there's more of a range of experience, and it comes through this physical act of putting it on paper, whereas a camera it's an instantaneous recording of time, and it goes through the process and the emulsion, and then it shows itself. It can be beautiful, and it can be artistic, it can be wonderful, but there's that slowing down and the thinking. Well, even an immediate drawing, you're still making very quick decisions that a camera can make and a photographer can make, but it's much more personal that it's coming through your lens than in just a quick machine.
If I'm to say, I remember when Matthew Brady was doing his incredible photos in the Civil War. A lot of artists said, well, we're done. They don't need us anymore. They thought they were at the end of their careers, but it's just another choice.
Yeah.
You know.
I think you're right on that. It's not this or that. It's both.
Yeah.
You need the poetry and you need the prose.
Yeah.
You want a more full experience. As a combat camera officer, sorry about that. As a combat camera officer, I can tell you that there's limitations to a camera. You don't always catch the critical moment. Frequently, we're moving at night, so some of your paintings come from here. And if you get a photo at all, it's real soft and blurry and very poorly exposed because it's midnight and there's smoke in the sky and all of that. And you can't take a sculpture with a camera. They don't have one of those yet.
They're getting close, though.
Yeah, they are. Those 3D printers are scary. So what inspires you in your current artistic endeavors based on your experience as a combat artist? Was that one of those moments in time that set a foundation for you, or challenged you to go in a different way, or what?
Sorry, as the new guy, but I gotta say, the immediacy, when you're having to sketch. The first patrol I went on, I didn't get a sketch. Well, except for there was a time on top of a building and they were calling in an airstrike. Then I could sketch, but they gave me this shotgun with no sling because they didn't want the combat artist just to have his pistol and that was it. They were freaking out. Well, you got to have something. So they give me this shotgun and I'm carrying it literally over my elbows. I had no strap, and so I had to use my camera. So I'm walking along going, click. What have I done? Click. Why am I
Shut
here?
that thing
Click.
down.
Yeah. But when I was able to sketch, the thing from looking at the Casellis and looking at the Gishes and looking at these things that are expressive and they're immediate, it's like you had no time when you're sketching. You know, if you're lucky, they might be sleeping at the end of the day. You might be able to sketch and take a little time. But training the eye and the hand to do it quickly has been invaluable for developing just rapidly compared to if I'd still be a civilian or had still been a civilian.
So it impacts the way you see. You do a lot of plein air work.
Yeah. Well, even in the Army, when I was using a pen and ink, my sketches are, I'm going to say they're almost like shorthand. In other words, if somebody else saw them, they may not see them as, you know, I mean, I can look at that shorthand piece that I did, and I can turn it into something I
Right.
realize again. And yeah, I can do things quite quickly. You know, as a matter of fact, my plein air friends, I'm out there, and I said, one of them said, yeah, I suppose you got 10 done now, and they're still working on their first one. But I do work fast, yeah.
Good, good.
But when I was in the Army, I was a very young person. I was only 22 years old, and I hadn't developed as an artist yet. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the artists that were on the Army art teams hadn't developed. You know, I shouldn't say that they hadn't developed. They were all young people. Oh, you guys were young. Jim was young.
Yep.
One time.
That's a long time ago.
That was the young guy right there.
Yeah, but you know,
Jim was very young once upon a time, according to this picture.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was taken as a. That particular picture was taken when we were visiting. We visited all types of units, and there was pacification programs as well as
Right,
combat
right.
programs. And that one was what was called a med cap, where they went out into a village and they handed out soap or they did whatever whatever to be. If there was illness in the villages, not everything was destruction in the war. The Army, you know, tried to do some things on the other way to win the
Oh, sure.
favor of the
The hearts and
people.
minds.
Yeah, the hearts and minds. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ben was young once.
Yeah, there he is.
What did your experience in Vietnam do for the rest of your artistic career, Ben? I saw one picture that you submitted that is, it's here somewhere. I'm sure of it. There we go. So
Well,
this is after Vietnam. So you're reflecting on what happened,
Yeah.
is my interpretation.
yes, that's actually several things. I went to study in Italy at that point. And, of course, the change from Vietnam, because I went to Italy almost as soon as I got out of the Marines,
Wow.
and I was ready to go after 2.5 years of another kind of life. Florence was an amazing change, and but at the same time, the kind of experiences, and I don't really believe you let them go.
I don't think so.
You might have tried to do that, but that image right there was memories of the time where it was really wet and all around caisson, and that kind of stuff was awful mud and things that are just more of that kind of memory than a lot of other things. Leeches, things that you can remember that you just as soon not. But that's, it was mosquitoes. I mean, I think everybody I knew got some form of malaria.
Right.
And it was, that whole experience had a lot to do with how I sort of look at things, I'm sure.
Okay. I was looking at this picture earlier. It's from Army Cat Team 7.
That picture, particular picture, is Steve Randall from Team 7. And during that Burns series, he said probably 70% of the people who were in Vietnam never saw combat. And I think it's probably a similar percentage with the artists. I don't know. This particular piece that Steve Reynolds did, he was on an ambush patrol, and I happen to know him. He lives in South Dakota too, so I know the story pretty good. And that's him feeding the bullets into the machine gun, because the ammo guy had left to get somebody was wounded, and when they got ambushed, somebody got wounded, and the ammo guy had to go get the wounded guys, and the machine gunner was struggling with the belt, the bullets on the belt going into the machine gun. So Steve stepped up, put down his sketchbooks and stuff like that. So and it helped him do that. And he said that that's the only painting that he did that he actually put himself into the painting. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think,
He was on,
go ahead.
yeah, he was on Cat 7. Which is in 1968.
This, I think, is really expressive, and you can't do that with that specific type of image with a camera.
That was done on a batik too. The media is a little odd,
okay.
for yeah.
Okay.
That's a batik.
Whoa.
Okay,
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah,
That's Roger Blum, he was on Team 1. I asked him if we could put this in there because this is an example of, I would think that there would be no censorship. The Army would not want you showing a picture of hooch being burned down and with little babies in it.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that the Army doesn't ever censorship things, but if they do, it's in the pictures that when they have an exhibit, they'll
right. What they choose
they're
to put
curate.
on
They
display.
call it curators.
Right,
but,
right. Yeah, those
it
curators.
can be censorship too. Yeah, but that's a good example of. And Roger was a conscientious objector.
Really?
Yes, there was 2 of them on the Army team. Him and another one on Team 1. And he didn't carry a weapon or he didn't carry anything. He was in a medic corps, I think, is where he was situated in the Army. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, this is a difficult topic, and the title says an awful lot. The Lost of War.
Yeah.
Those little kids are in their mid-50s now. So this is one by Chris Battles.
That's one of the Navy. That's one of the Navy pieces. Yeah.
Moving on.
That's actually Marine and Navy.
Is this one in our collection yet, Joan? Have you worked that out?
No, it's the Navy's. Yeah. Although it is the 24th MEU, Marine Expeditionary Unit. So
Oh,
those
is it?
are Marines walking along the deck out
Okay,
to
good,
the.
good. Well, you've improved the
the
Navy
aircraft.
collection considerably.
Yeah, these are more. This is more studio paintings. Obviously, this is a little bit bigger. Obviously, sketching is much more immediate and black and white. And this takes a little bit longer. This is an acrylic, and I just wanted to do a composition like that because these guys are just pack animals going along. It just gets heavier and heavier. It seems every year. Yeah, it's
Yeah, the soldier's load and mobility of a nation.
yeah, basically.
This one might be hard to see.
Oh, yeah, you can't. Some of the things you do were a little bit PR, a little diplomatic. I was sketching the captain on the Harry S. Truman while he was in his chair on the bridge. So
Right.
it's a great way to establish good feelings, etc. You know.
Yeah. I did the same thing. I must have done hundreds of cartoons and girlfriend's drawings, and I'm sure that somewhere there's pictures with ladies with less clothes on than they should have. But you did what you had to get on the helicopter and make friends with whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. We've been there, done that.
But also on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's, Joan, in your collection somewhere, there's a picture of a sergeant major. He was not as nice as perhaps he could have been to some of us enlisted folks. And so I made sure I drew him, and he's, I don't know if he's ever seen the drawing, but he's in a little bit of a sandstorm in one of those desert coats that goes down about halfway down your thighs, in his boots, carrying toilet paper. So, yeah.
Necessity.
Yes.
Exactly. So it was a history, and it had to be documented. So recon team, what made you want to focus on the recon team?
I didn't go with them. They wouldn't let me. I mean, they were going to be out a while, but I was on my way to the MAG 16 had a chopper outfit up nearby Da Nang, and I was on my, but that just caught me. You know, you asked him a minute ago, what inspires you to do a particular, sometimes you just see something and say, that would make a neat painting, or that would make a neat drawing.
Okay.
It's not, you don't plan these things all the time, but just, you get motivated. I just like these guys' spirit. They were going, looking for trouble. And he just had, you know what else is, at this point, around this time, I was just getting in, I had a lot of contact with the grunts. And they didn't care a lick about the Pentagon, but they didn't care about the president back home, or they cared about the guy next to him.
That's it.
That's all it's all about. And that group there really impressed me. And that's kind of the overall attitude of grunts in the field. You know, they know what they're out there for, but they care more about their buddies.
Absolutely.
That was really neat.
Absolutely. So Ben, this isn't the specific piece I was talking about. The other one that you've got is less complete. But, it's only got the figure trying to lift the wounded. This, though, I mean, it speaks to me in a real visceral way.
Yeah.
I can look at this for hours. What motivated you to do this piece?
Well, if you've seen that scene a couple of times, you can be motivated by it. Yeah. It's true that I think basically the Marine in the field takes care of their friends very, very well. And there's an amazing amount of selflessness that these fellows would expose themselves for various reasons to go out and help wounded buddy, and they would. They did. And it was a part of it. To me, it was as real as. You know, I might show my. I don't know.
That's a superb drawing, too.
Yeah, it is.
Very
If I'm,
That's pretty much made up. Yeah, it's more. I mean, there were some sketches I did that
Sure.
pulled together
Yeah,
some of these things, but.
what I love about this piece is that, and you can see this in every era of combat art. If you look at some of the other stuff from World War I, you had a lot of the trained illustrators, and their style was illustrative of that illustrative time.
Right.
And then here I can see a lot of learning in that drawing. I see a lot of artistic, all that training. I see all that. It's informed by, it looks like the Pietà or some sort of classical thing, and you can see that in the composition. And it's very powerful. It's powerful subject matter wise, as well as it's been done by an artist. So it looks, it's really inspiring.
I think when asked the question about what's the difference between photography and art, this is one of the things that stands out. The artist consciously includes just as much or just as little as they want. They don't have to fill the whole frame with film. You've got a choice, and you can edit that down to just a handful of strokes and say an awful lot. We had a professor come to us from Yale who was interested in the collection and assumed that he would find a whole body of works with, chest-beating propaganda, John Wayne type movie posters. But when he went through the collection, he saw stuff like this. And he went away with a different perception of combat art in general and Marine Corps combat art in particular. We had an artist who had a show up in Maine. It was called Fire and Ice. It was his work from Iraq. And he had a number of protesters outside.
Oh.
And they all felt that his art glorified war. So he brought them in, and he showed them pieces not unlike Ben's work here. And they all but one changed their mind. They realized, I can respect the warrior, and I don't have to necessarily feel the same way about the war. I think that art opens a channel of communication to different groups that isn't available through other channels.
Just to what you're saying, I think drawings like this, as opposed to a photograph, this drawing asks the viewer to participate a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell them everything. A photograph gives you every detail. Or
Exactly.
tries to. And you have to imagine what the artist thought and felt
You know what?
along with that.
Before the days of photography, the war art that you would see would be big battle scenes. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that the camera did was freed up an artist to do things like this on an individual, go in a one-on-one basis. You know, focus in on smaller individual art soldiers, everyday happenings, rather than try to get the whole battle scene in. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back to the Navy.
And more Navy stuff.
Well, tell us about this piece.
Well, what inspired me, okay, whenever you can paint in oil and you have the time to do it, it's wonderful when the subject matter meets with the medium. And this is one of those paintings where I had a blast doing it, because not only was it fun on the ship when they were doing it, because they were doing drills all the time. This is a general quarters drill. They have to practice all the time. This is a peacetime event, and I actually witnessed a real leak event on another ship, but this is just to keep, they've got to keep practice. It's because their lives depend upon it.
Their skills are sharp.
Yeah, exactly. So the great part about this was, not only was it a great experience and fun while it was happening, it was a joy to paint because of the mist and the clouds and the smoke. It was fun. And not that combat art is always fun, obviously, but this is one of your more peacetime, but still fun.
Jim, this is one of your works.
It's watercolor, cartoon. I think this is an example of downtime for soldiers, and a lot of the artists do things that relate to when they're downtime. Some of them did music. I don't know how they got these instruments over in Vietnam, but they would be instruments over there. When they ship over, they would have little gigs. Church, there was religious scenes. Some of the artists did religious scenes, church scenes, things like that. What you don't see in this picture here is the MPC. I bet they're not playing with real money. They're playing with MPC. So that was play. We call it play money over there.
The chits?
Yeah. Well, in a war zone, they didn't use. You couldn't have actual cash.
Right.
Silver certificates or anything like that. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Jim?
Part of the community thing, there was an indigenous people trying to live a life while all this was going on around them, and sometimes they were oblivious, sometimes they were scared like we were, but that's existed while there was a lot of action in the field.
Howard Turpning did a very similar piece.
Yeah, he did.
I was thinking about the Turping thing.
Have you seen his piece?
Yeah, Howard was in country when I was there, and he talk about an education from a mentor. He helped me an awful lot because I was just a kid,
Right.
But actually his brother was killed in action as a Marine, and he wanted to get the Society of Illustrators was approached about sending civilians over there.
Okay.
That's how we had a couple. Boy, I'll tell you, that was a great experience to have those guys around.
Absolutely.
When I saw this come up, it reminds me of we went through a bazaar on patrol in Afghanistan. This reminded me of and I had to look at it again. How similar the look of it.
Yeah, when you get a chance to look at the collection and spend some time in multiple collections, you start seeing repeat themes. And artists tend to focus on card games, on downtime, on helping their wounded, on the indigenous folk. When we sent Mike Gish to northern Iraq, a lot of the pictures were little, northern Iraqi kids and donkeys and interfacing with the service members from the different countries.
Remember that beautiful portrait he did of the Vietnamese girl?
Yeah.
It was John Singer Sargent grade stuff. I mean, it was.
Can I go back to this common theme deal one? I did a picture of a field haircut from the 1st Infantry Division. And somebody from England, and I don't know who it was, he sent me an email with a picture in it that he'd been doing some research on the Viet Cong, and they had some combat artists. And one of the pictures that he sent me was a field haircut. The Viet Cong getting a field haircut.
Wow, actually.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Why
Go,
not?
go back one more picture on this one. No, the tent.
That one?
No, when you were going to go, you had to, yeah, go another one. Yeah, okay. These two go together. This was the 196th Infantry. It was one of the field trips that I took out on a patrol. And the 196th is one of the better units I went with because I got a grasp of what the whole picture was going on. When I went in there, they gave us a briefing, and they assigned a PIO guy, and then they took me on a recon helicopter and over the whole area that we were going to be out marching around in later on, so I could see the pock marks and I could see the trail marks where the APCs made, and then they set me down on a hilltop with a radio operator. They were the guys with the eyes for the mortar people, and I sat there for a while, and then I went out to they took me and landed me in a landing zone with the actual patrol. And our first night out, I built this tent. That tent that I built was a poncho tent. I thought it was a pretty nice tent. I'd never built one before. I did a pretty good job, but that night it rained and the water came flushing through there. I forgot I didn't dig a trench around it, is what they told me. Oh, I'm an old camper. I mean, I grew up in South Dakota, but I didn't build a tent around that thing. So then when we went out in the field, that's the other picture. And we went through marching, and like he said, the bugs and the heat and all that sort of thing. We went into the stream, and when we came out of that stream, the guys told me to take my boots off and look, and there my legs were full of leeches, and just like he was talking about there.
Yeah.
And they got a kick out of that because I was kind of a greenhorn with that business. I was a postal clerk in Korea is what I was, and so so I didn't. And when the only initiation to war, was when I went over here. I went to a clerk school and all that sort of thing. So I was. But this picture here, there's a guy who wrote a paper on it, strangely enough, and he sees all kinds of things, and he's a veteran. That's why I think he sees things in the background that may or may not I put in there,
Well, to Jim's point, when it comes to art, frequently when you leave an impression, that impression is filled with each individual that looks at it, and they bring their own experience to it. I think that's one of the values of a painting. There's an artist in our collection, Fabian, right? His work is very expressionistic, and everybody sees something different when they look at his stuff.
One of the a veteran service officer in South Dakota what I deal with, he's an Indian, and he saw eagle feathers coming down out of there.
Oh, I can see that.
Because it's important to the Indian tradition and as warriors, as eagles and stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we've got time to look at another picture, and then we'll open it to questions. So, Ben, two beautiful little portraits.
Yeah.
Well, when they do have time, they hang around, so you can try to capture them. Yeah.
Right.
Again, when you have downtime, that's when you are able, like there was pictures of Marines at Easter Mass, for example, on a hilltop.
Right.
Of course, that's the time to do it. You feel a little bit conflicted because you should be paying attention, but drawing a picture was also important. So there are other times. I remember a sergeant who was cooking bacon. Those are times where you can really do it from life without any complaint.
Right. As an artist, I didn't see that I had much downtime. I was always drawing.
Can I say something about the power of this collecting art? It's a lot about tradition. I mean, we talked about earlier that in the Revolutionary War, there were sketches going on. And
Sure.
before the camera, and we just kept doing it. And nobody's bigger on tradition than the Marine Corps. We do it because we always did it. And it's an honor to be part of it, a link in that chain.
Right.
Be part, that's what, and after I got back and realized what I had just done for a year or so, I was like, holy cow, this is really an incredible honor to be able to tell the story of my colleagues.
Right.
And to carry on a tradition that's been very important to the Marine Corps and all the services for that matter.
Absolutely. So we got about 20 minutes left, right? Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? You've never been quiet, ever. I don't ever remember. Anybody?
I've got a question.
Well, we have microphones on the left and right.
Yeah.
So if,
Well, can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you.
Yeah.
well, it's not for us. It's for it's being recorded.
We got time.
They couldn't repeat the question.
Thank you. I was a
Can-
tank commander.
Can you speak into the mic, sir?
I was a tank commander in Hill 55, Marine Corps, 1966. I never saw any combat artist, or the closest thing I saw from an entertainment point of view was Charleston Heston
Oh, good.
on Hill 55, and he was with Bob Hope doing one of these
USO thing?
supporting the troops. Yeah.
yeah.
But my question is, it sounds like whether you were in the Army or the Marine Corps, you guys had carte blanche. You pretty much did what you wanted to.
Yep.
Is that because of the artistic ability you had, or did the average line officer just say, "Don't bug me, go do what you got to do"?
Well, anybody want to take that?
Well, I got that impression all the time. If I was on the ground with an outfit, I'd find whoever was in charge to tell them I was there, because I was different. I was a new guy, or they didn't know who I was. But they just said, "We don't want any John Waynes here. You just stay out of the way," because we're a team, right? And that makes sense, right? But I think the reason you never saw any, because we're kind of inconspicuous. We kind of blend in. We might have a camera on us or something, but do you ever see any news media guys like we saw a lot of press guys from the States, and actually from other countries, but
Yeah, well, no, we didn't. I saw a lot of reporters from Stars and Stripes magazine.
right, a few of them out
They
there,
would take pictures and all.
Right.
But I had no idea you relied so much on cameras.
Well, it's pretty hard to stop the war. So, hold it right there.
And it really depends on the artist. Like
Yeah.
there's a fellow named John Groth. I don't think
Oh,
Yeah.
he relied on cameras at all. Lots of folks didn't. But to your question, why did we have carte blanche? From a Marine perspective, dating back to World War II, 1942, they didn't want us making stuff up. They didn't want to have a tinge of propaganda. They wanted it to be a simple truth of what America's Marines were doing in the Pacific. And so those orders followed down to Korea and then
Oh,
to
really?
Vietnam and today in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Huh.
So we send somebody into theater and we expect them to see something and tell an honest story about it, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Well, I think as well, I mean, I was an infantry officer. There was no way I could get to be a combat artist when I was serving as an infantry officer. And I never was able to. And when I up for an extra 6 months, they found another place for me to go as an infantry officer. And it happened again. And so I became a company commander. I became knocked back down to an executive officer. I took over a reaction company at one point in Quang Tri, and they shifted you around when I kept trying to get to be a combat artist, and it just wasn't happening. And it wasn't going to happen until finally there was actually no possible thing I could do except go and wait for a battalion kind of assignment in Okinawa or someplace. And I wasn't going to do that. And they finally said you could be a combat artist on the last 6 months.
Your last-
So,
As we say, thank you for your service.
well, thank you.
Did you have a question, sir?
You all mentioned something that this is something you were interested in doing at a young age, but you hadn't done it yet, but you were artists. Can you talk about some of the things that evolved in regards to being artists and what you were looking for? I'm going out tomorrow with a group at 5 a.m. This is what I'm thinking about as far as ideas. Artists think about ideas all the time in regards to their art. Can you talk about how that evolved and how you became better artists over time through that experience?
What do you want to take it?
Well, I got my first job as a result of my experience over there. The college that I went to did a story on me as a combat artist, and AP picked it up, and a publisher, a magazine, a book publisher saw it, and then they called me up, and they were in need of an artist, and they hired me. I said, well, I've never done any book or publishing things anymore. We'll train you. But as far as this style of art I do today, I don't think it had an effect on that part of it. But it's always been a career builder for that in that area. But
what I looked for was contrasts. I wanted to contrast the East versus the West, the rough versus the smooth. So American Marines versus Somali children, or versus Haiti children. I wanted to have a contrast in my pieces. After the Battle of Kafji, there was this fellow named Corporal Birch, and Kafji was attacked by the Iraqis. It was overrun by the Iraqis. It's the northernmost seacoast town in Saudi Arabia. That's how it was on the news. When there's only one target, it's easy to know where to hit. So the handful of Marines that were there held off the entire Iraqi army with indirect fire and fire missions, and this one little puppy survived. We called him Lucky the Wonder Dog. And so I was compelled to do a portrait of Corporal Birch and Lucky the Wonder Dog, as it spoke to me as a person. It put a human face on what was otherwise a pretty ugly scenario.
It's pretty hard to write a script for inspiration. It just has to happen. You react to a certain thing. That would be a neat story, or that would be. And you can't orchestrate any of it. It just has to come out of it. And the art it's very individual. Like Chris said, all artists are different.
One of our artists is named Mike Fay, and one of the pieces he did was of a lance corporal with, he was missing both legs. So he's sitting there with his new prosthetics, and he's looking pretty much at you. And that's all it is. It's just a simple portrait of a fellow dealing with his new reality. And Mike said that that was part of the story, and it had to be told. But at the time, there was a bit of a gag order on not showing people in coffins or coming off the plane in Dover or wounded, and it sort of bucked the system, and he got in a little bit of trouble for it, but it's still one of my favorite pieces of the day.
Truth hurts.
I think, yeah. Being inspired by what is true is part of it. You want to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Ed, buddy.
Well, my aunt, first of all, she's an artist, sculpture, a yogi master, and etc. She grew up in Montreal, Canada.
Oh, excellent.
But now, what I was seeing in the pictures previous is what you basically call psychodiagnostics, describing with the naked eye without taking it out of context. So I have about 50 of her paintings because she just passed away up in the Yonkers. And she has a master's degree from New Rochelle Studio Art Design up in Pelham, New York. And I used to used to teach art therapy at Sound Shore up in, Sound Shore in New Rochelle. And looking into how you visualize things, and I've been to many art exhibits, and I would tell people time and time out, it's all about taking that, as long as you don't take it out of the context, that where that psychodynamics is coming to be. And as far as you said you saw the wings, well, I saw beyond that as far as, if I looked beyond the horizon, it could have been the firing from the aftermath since they were on that trail, and plus being in Vietnam, all the camouflage is without, as long as you don't take it out of context, you can still visualize. But like I said earlier, I have about 50 of her paintings that I brought here, I have here with me. That I would I've been trying to get it on an exhibit, because she also paints acrylic enamel, charcoal. She did a picture of Van Gogh that you wouldn't believe.
Wow.
I've been trying to get it on an exhibit, but It's been hard because the market is in New York City, not here.
Right, right.
What I have. And I have it here with me here in D.C., but that's what, pardon me?
I was just going to say I'm sorry for your
So
loss.
I wanted to go ahead and try to do it that way. And then she also wrote a book on her life, because when she came from Montreal, Canada, she came to New York City out of all the places to Hell's Kitchen that you wouldn't
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. And sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
As the creators of these works of art, how do you want museums and the owners of the works to utilize them? What makes you proud?
That's what the Marines own them.
So what?
The Marines own the work, right?
What do you want us to do with them?
Yeah. How do you want us, the Marine Corps Museum, to display your work?
Or use it?
Or use it?
Well, I think the story is important, and all these are little stitches in the fabric. I mean, you can't take one particular, even the best of the collections, you can't take just one piece and say, this is the story.
Right.
It's a series and a whole assortment of different impressions. And the greatest part about our work is, like Chris said, the variety. You know, no two alike and all that. But it's a, you know, Vietnam War was not a real popular thing back here, remember? And when we were showing, after I got back stateside, I was traveling with a couple exhibits that were, as kind of an ambassador, I guess you'd call me. Colonel Henry asked me to do that, a couple of that, and we'd answer questions. People, one thing we did at Air Base Cherry Point, it was Memorial Day weekend, and we put a show up and they opened the base, I think, to visitors, civilians, and they all wanted to know, what is this stuff? And they were really surprised that we were making artwork based on Vietnam because it was kind of unpopular. But it gave it a spirit that they didn't quite grasp otherwise. You know, the media can slant things, they can, you know, tell you what they want you to hear, but we were telling the truth. We, you know, and it really gave a lot of the observers, a lot of the guests to those things, a different idea. You know, the struggle with the GI and, you know, the common Marine, what they had to put up with to be over there. But that was, the artwork was an ambassador itself.
I think in addition to having their regular displays at the museum, now the Army's got a, do you know how they're coming along with their museum? They're almost got it done. They were supposed to open it this year, I think. But I think having traveling exhibits that go out is one way that art would, you know, really is, it gets out more to the people. They had a big show I was involved with up at the Constitutional Center of Army art. And it wasn't just Vietnam era Army art, it was the whole broad spectrum that the Army collection has. And it was really well attended and well received. I was involved with another one at the Indianapolis Art Center, and that one too was very well received. And that was just the Vietnam, the Army stuff, our team. Not our team, it was all the 9 teams of the Armies, but that was very well received. Matter of fact, the lady that was organized the show said that she saw people come to that exhibit that she had never seen in that museum before. You know, that they were veterans is what they were probably, and they just weren't art people, but they came because of the art and because of that. It's a softer touch to art than photography is too, you know. It's you know, it's just
One of the reasons I decided to re-enlist, even though I knew I was going to end up in Iraq almost immediately, was the fact that, wow, if I do artwork and it's accepted in the collection, it'll be taken care of for, you know, for posterity. So that's a big thing. And so Marines love telling their story. I know the Army does too, the Navy does, and it's great being a part of that. So traveling exhibits are a great thing, and just having it on display is an honor.
I think to Jim's point, during Vietnam, there was a lot of traveling exhibits, and they used the art to reach out to groups of people that they otherwise couldn't reach. It was a conduit for communication, and given that less than 1% of America serves, it's good to have something to be able to reach out to that other 99%.
Well, maybe you know, what are the requirements for the Marine in order to have a traveling show? The Army is requiring, is my understanding, an accredited museum, which is pretty difficult to get. I don't know.
It is. Yes, ma'am, you've got a question?
Yeah, I do. To what extent did you all consider yourselves journalists or reporters through your art, in addition to being artists first and foremost?
Go ahead.
Good question.
Well, I was actually, for a year I taught at the Corcoran. One of the semesters I taught a reportage class, a witness art class. And so we are, from a physical standpoint, logistically speaking, when I was in Iraq or Afghanistan, I was, in a way, an embedded photographer or journalist. I was taking in as much as I could. I kept a journal. I still keep a journal. So we're gathering, memories and as much visual information as you can, names of people, addresses, all these things. So you are you're taking in all this information. So you're trying to be a journalist in the sense that you are not taking things out of context, as he said. You're really, that is a great way to look at it. You're taking it as much as you can through your filter. You have a natural artistic filter, and you've got your education and your biases like anybody else. But you're taking as much as you can in, as unbiased as you can, and in that sense, you're trying to be a visual journalist. You are trying to be, the reportage artist, to say what you've seen.
If we were painting all these beautiful paintings and drawings and stuck them in a closet, we were artists, but were we journalists? Were we really communicating with anybody? Were we telling any stories?
Not until it's seen, huh?
Well, it's hard to say when you think of Rembrandt doing beggars, rat catchers, people like this. One of the greatest combat artists was Winslow Homer. He was an illustrator to begin with, used the camera in the Civil War. Right. At the same time, painted and drew from life the whole time he was there. Did wonderful drawings without the camera. And at the same time, he did it because it was art. It was a form of expression that just is alive. And if you can somehow convey that with the museum, it shows what happened is not just an element of history, not just something that is a form of journalism, is something that was lived through and was expressed. And that, I think, if you could touch other people with that idea, you would probably find people to be coming to see what in the world would cause that to happen.
I think when I was doing it, I was, from a journalist point of view, I don't know I would call myself a journalist, but I wasn't doing it so much for the Army. I was trying to express the experience that I had with my art, and try to do it as best I could through my paintings and my drawings. Right. And it wasn't an agenda that I had or anything else. I just, whatever the experience I had, I tried to get it on paper with some scratches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got an interesting thought.
We got about a minute and a half.
A lot, the grunts that were in the worst of it all, their wives say, he doesn't talk about it, he doesn't tell me anything. But the one guy, he was an artillery guy, he said, you were speaking for us. And that was real powerful. That kind of gets back to your journalism question, doesn't it? We were telling the story that they were just not willing or wanted to remember.
Yeah, one of our colleagues, Mike Fay, drew a portrait of a young man named Nick Chacon, and he was one of the people who succumbed to suicide. And that drawing lives on. And to see Mike interface with that young man's mom, you touch people in a very real way. Yeah. There's more to his memory than he just ended his life. He lived a life, and it was a life worth living, and we miss him. Any other questions? Usually I put people to sleep much faster than that. All right.
I'm a friend of Jim Green's, the tank commander from Vietnam. He's got a chest full of medals, but he won't brag on that. But thank you for a lovely program today. I wonder kind of the juxtaposition, to follow up on the last question, if you will, where art and journalism blend, meet, overlap, or don't. From your guys' perspective, the panel's perspective, I mean, I think President Nixon said at one point, if I lose Walter Cronkite, I've lost the nation, you know? And I wonder what the blending of what you guys, and thank you for your service, first of all, I should have said that first. My father's a naval officer, my grandfather's a naval officer, great-grandfather's a naval officer. I didn't have the pleasure to wear the uniform, but thank you for your service. But you guys, I think, brought a lot of stuff home for us. And what is your artistic view of where journalism does bleed into, you know, our art becomes journalism and vice versa? And my second thought is, how does that form in the political dynamic of the fabric of, you know, civil society into shaping public opinion? I know you're trying to report the facts, as it were, or your vision of what you, artistic vision of what you saw in history, but what do you think that has to do with ultimately affecting public perception and support, irrespective, not, I know we're focused on Vietnam, but irrespective, actually, of the particular conflict, if you understand my question?
Well, I'm not sure that the art has had very much effect on it because it hasn't been out in the public very much. When I go out and I ever give a talk about this sort of thing, they're really surprised that the Army had artists and they don't even know about it. So if nobody knows about it, they can't have an effect. You know, in what you're talking, you know, in the dynamics that you're probably talking about as a political tool, but it could have, I suppose, but I don't think it has had because there just hasn't been the exposure.
Yeah, it's also much more distilled and slowed down. One of the things I saw myself as a part of was painting not only for today's families, where I was making artwork that I wanted the families of the Marines to see, and the Marines to be able to see on the wall and say, that's me, and then their kids come along, and then, but it's not just for today, and it's not to sway an opinion, it's to show what we experienced, and what the grunts experienced, what the people over there, what it was like over there, and then we're also doing it for 100 years from now. And just like we look back at the, you know, the Stella of Armant, whatever it's called, the Egyptian thing, you know, these old war art things. We are painting for centuries, and so we're showing what it's like in our environment. Like we have a Vietnam artist here. Well, some of their experiences translate into my experience artistically as well as Marine and in the Army, but.
So in that sense, it's
timeless.
It's saving history.
Yeah, it's in the now, and each section of this artistic combat art history is in the now. It's in his now, and it's in his now, it's in mine, but it's also in the everyman and the every time. So that's what we're trying to reach. You know.
You know, I think that the art kind of supports journalism and vice versa. I think it's all, again, the bigger picture, all these little.
Two little squares on the same quilt.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can't do
Well,
can't do it all alone. It has to be kind of in concert together.
Right. We're getting the hook, I think.
Oh, okay.
We're out of time.
Oh, gee.
And that's all she has to say about that. Well, thanks for your time and your patience and your interest and your support. And for the Vietnam veterans in the audience, welcome home. Semper Fi. We love you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to the archives. And thanks to the archives for highlighting.